We've been contacted by people throughout Britain who are desperate to have their family mysteries resolved.
My dad was adopted, and I'm here today to find out more about his birth family.
My husband's great-grandmother is a bit of a family mystery. We've hit a dead end.
Taking on today's mysteries are our team of experts. Historian and law lecturer Onyeka Nubia uncovers an incredible wartime survival story.
He was a prisoner of war, but your grandfather escaped.
Wow.
Ancestry genealogist Brad Argent delves into the 1800s to solve a marriage mystery.
He was living apart from Jemima, and he was in financial difficulty.
I hadn't thought of them being separated.
And tackling our first story is writer and historian Tessa Dunlop, who's helping one visitor to resolve a family rumour about her great-grandmother's mixed-faith marriage. Who people choose to marry could be contentious, even shameful, in 1950s Christian Britain. Up next is Sara Jardine, who wants us to help her solve a long-held family secret involving her great-grandmother.
I'm Sara Jardine, and I'm from West Sussex. I have a son, he's 3 years old. We're also expecting another baby shortly. I'd really like to know about my great-grandmother. We don't know how she ended up from wherever she was from in the East End of London, married to a Polish Jew in the 1900s. My great-grandmother was Marjorie Alexander, and her maiden name was Marjorie Sendall. It was said that she wasn't Jewish, so we wanted to know if she did actually convert to marry my great-grandfather, David, or if she just kind of went with the flow, because all the children were raised Jewish and all went to a Jewish school in the East End of London. My grandfather didn't really talk much about his childhood, so we're not really sure what it was like or what experiences he had. So we're keen to find out a bit more about her, and then that will hopefully lead us to finding a bit more about what his childhood was like.
Sara, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, it's a pleasure.
And you've brought with you the conundrum of your great-grandmother Marjorie.
Yep, that's right.
What are the main issues or mysteries surrounding Marjorie?
Some people say she was from Ireland, some people say she was from Scotland. We wanted to know how she ended up in the East End of London, married to a Polish Jewish immigrant.
David Alexander.
David Alexander.
We struggled to find a Marjorie Sendall in Scotland, indeed in England. However, I'm going to show you now a register from 1939.
Right.
And if you look at the top, you can see a David Alexander is living with a Martha Alexander. So it's Martha, not Marjorie.
OK. But I just find it so strange that she's changed her name. Why the change?
Quite a lot was going to happen to young Martha, which may shed some light on why there was a need to shift her identity a bit.
OK.
I'm going to show you a newspaper article from the 29th of January, 1878.
OK.
The Essex Herald. But if we could just focus on the name Edward Sendall. He's driving his cab home, and by cab we mean a horse and cart, effectively.
Right.
He turns his cab down the yard late at night, but he doesn't go home, and his son is sent to look for him the crack of dawn on Thursday and finds his father lying quite dead under the cab, which was turned over on its side.
Oh, that's so sad. So that was Martha's father?
Well deduced. She's just 6 months old when her father dies.
Oh, so sad.
So this is desperate for Emma, her mother.
Yeah.
The breadwinner's been wiped out overnight.
Right.
There's no welfare state.
No. Times are tough.
Really tough.
Yeah.
We find her in the 1881 census.
Right.
She did indeed enter a workhouse.
Oh, my God.
There's Emma. Her admissions age was just 52. And she didn't stay long, a month or so. You can see there she leaves a couple of weeks later.
Yeah.
Islington workhouse was particularly unappealing, dismal. But you would, for your child, get basic medical care and basic education.
Right. So it was the best place for them at the time, really.
Seems to have had a profoundly negative impact on Mother Emma, because later that same year, we find the death registry on which Emma is featured. So you can see there Emma Sendell, aged 52, dying in Islington. And when we look in the records as to what happens to Martha, we find her again, aged 11, and she's been enrolled in King Edward's School in Southwark by her brother, and she stays there until she's 16. Wow. The priority was to ensure she remained healthy and useful.
Right.
The best, really, that your great-grandmother Martha could have hoped for was work as a domestic servant.
Right.
And sure enough, we see her discharged January 10th, 1894. Martha Sendell, aged 16 years, has been in the school 4 years and 11 months, and her conduct has been good. She is to assist in general work by Mrs. Jackson. Now, you were at the whim of your employer as a domestic servant.
Right.
There were no welfare or work standards in those days.
Luck of the draw.
It was the luck of the draw. She doesn't last very long in this particular job. And indeed, she is found in an admission to Newington Workhouse in Southwark.
So she goes back to the workhouse?
She does.
Poor Martha.
We find her in one more position as a servant shortly after this. What's interesting, her name has gone from Martha to Marjorie. Marjorie Lillian Sendell. Now, maybe something happened untoward in the workhouse. I don't know, why did she lose the job with the first employer? We don't know. We're now going to track on to 1899.
Right.
So she's a 22-year-old woman, and we have here a record of baptisms. And I want to focus on one little boy in particular, a Walter Frank, born in August 1899.
Walter Frank.
And you'll see there that the mother is a Marjorie Lillian. And you can also see that it's her surname that's registered as the child's name. There's one scored out. So maybe there's an idea of a dad, but there wasn't a married husband producing a legitimate child.
Okay.
So it's a precarious existence for Marjorie at this stage.
Oh my God.
Orphaned, 2 stints in a workhouse, invidious work as a domestic servant, and now an illegitimate baby. Have you ever heard of a Walter Frank?
Never. I've never heard that name be mentioned, Walter.
There may be a reason for that. We find a record for him in Whitechapel Union Infirmary in October of the same year, registering his death.
Wow.
So she's had a really tough time.
She has.
Emotionally, physically.
Yeah.
Really the worst start in life she could have hoped for.
Oh, poor Martha.
However, in life, at least in the old-fashioned fairy books, all you needed was a good man, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's true, yeah.
So who comes along in 1900?
My great-granddad.
Aha! She's married David Alexander.
And there's more to come for Sara when Tessa reveals a religious divide in the family.
We found several of the girls in a record of baptisms for the Church of England.
My God, really?
Next up, Onyeka is helping one man find out more about his grandfather's incredible war story. 10 million servicemen and civilians were captured and sent to detention camps in World War I. Among that number was Paul Toon's grandfather. Now, Paul wants to find out how he ended up in a German prisoner of war camp.
My name is Paul Toon. I'm a Freemason, and I'm currently the worshipful master of the Knighton Lodge. And my grandfather, Elijah Toon, was a soldier in the First World War. He went off to fight in 1914 and came out in 1918. My grandfather died in 1959 when I was 6 years old. I inherited his medals, which I didn't really take much notice of till recent years when I was looking at my family tree, thinking, what did he do? Was he some form of hero of some sort? I understand he was taken prisoner at one stage. I don't know where or when. Sadly, my father died last year, so again, that kind of source of information that I couldn't get anymore. If I can find out the answer to these questions, I'll be actually more thrilled than anything else. And it's all things that I just feel I need to log and make sure that it's passed on to future generations. Otherwise, it'll just die out with me.
Hello, Paul.
How'd you do?
Welcome.
Thank you.
So, you understand that you brought some medals?
Yes, I found these when I was clearing out my father's attic.
So you don't know why your grandfather got these medals?
No.
Or what he did in World War I?
No. And he was a soldier, that was it.
These are the war records for Elijah Toon. It has the list of his regiment, Leicestershire Yeomanry, that he was a corporal at that point. And it shows that he was awarded the Victory Medal and the British War Medal. The British War Medal is awarded to every person who entered into the war. And the Victory Medal was awarded to the vast majority of men who served. So they were relatively common. He also received a more uncommon award known as the Meritorious Service Medal, which in Elijah's case was awarded in recognition of devotion to duty and valuable services rendered whilst a prisoner of war or interned. That's a very uncommon award.
Tell me more.
So we need to now find out what he did as a prisoner of war. This is a record of your grandfather's examination, because obviously every prisoner of war was examined on coming back. They wanted to find out if they'd crossed over to the enemy lines, and that's why, you know, they were now free.
Yeah.
This account explains how he was taken as a prisoner of war on the 14th of November, 1914, near Ypres. And he was taken in cattle carts to Wittenberg prisoner of war camp. The camp was about 10.5 acres on a plot of ground that was actually designed for a much smaller number of men. There were at least 17,000 soldiers crammed into that small space. It was a desperate place. Many of the men were in rags, their shoes were worn through, and they were forced to wear straw on their feet. There is an account of a doctor who attended one of the prisoners, and he brushed his shoulder to remove some dust. And he found out that it was not dust on his shoulder, but lice.
Oh, good God.
Living lice.
Oh.
The rations were put in trolleys and just sent forward because the soldiers were dying of typhus. You know, over 185 people, perhaps more, died of typhus. In December 1914, the German military left the camp. So effectively, they'd been left to die. Dogs were brought in to maintain the line that the soldiers did not cross. But your grandfather escaped.
Wow.
Now, Elijah provided an account of his escape. This is what your grandfather says. He explained that because of his experience, he managed to pretend that he was a member of the Royal Army Medical Corps. And he and another man left the camp on December the 28th and were escorted by the German officials because they were convinced they were part of the medical corps. They were able to cross from German lines into the British lines with apparently almost no effort at all. He had his wits about him the whole time.
That's where I must get it from, though.
And then when he was on the British lines, he wired the British government to let them know where he was. They came back to England on the 6th of January after spending some days in Aldershot where he was examined. And then he proceeded home.
Amazing. Didn't know that
There's a
at all.
lot to take in, I know. So your grandfather was in this terrible, horrific war camp. And not only did your grandfather have immense courage, he had the wherewithal to effect his escape.
Yes.
And effect the escape of another as well.
Yes.
That's an incredible...
It is. It's a great story. It really is.
So what's been passed on to you now is a great legacy.
Yes, definitely. And I can pass it on to my sons and grandson.
Thank you, Paul. It's been a tremendous pleasure. Thank you.
My pleasure as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The story of the prisoner of war camp was just incredible, especially to kind of survive it and escape. And the method of escaping was quite ingenious. It just makes me immensely proud because to have the initiative to help others and actually to escape, to, rejoin the war effort. The whole family's like that. There's an old adage, lead, follow, or get out of the way, and we've always been leaders. We can't have second best, we just go for it, and it's obviously come probably via my grandfather.
Paul now knows the truth about his grandfather's ingenious escape from the prisoner of war camp and can take real pride knowing how he won those medals. Earlier, we met Sara Jardine, who learned a lot about her great-grandmother's tough early start in life.
So it's a precarious existence for Marjorie at this stage. Orphaned, 2 stints in a workhouse, invidious work as a domestic servant, and now an illegitimate baby.
Things began to look up, though, when Marjorie met Sara's grandfather.
However, in life, at least in the old-fashioned fairy books, all you needed was a good man, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's true, yeah.
So who comes along in 1900?
My great-granddad.
Aha! Let's see if we've got a wedding certificate. Wow. Literally a year after the death of her son, she's married David Alexander. And we can see there he's registering himself as a fishmonger, his father a butcher. You mentioned your great-grandfather came from Poland, is that right?
Yeah, well, yeah. We're told he's come from Poland with his brother Israel.
It's quite tough going being a Jew from Eastern Europe in the East End of London.
I can imagine.
There was a reason why thousands of Jews were leaving Poland, Romania, Russia.
Yeah.
Things were really beyond the pale, literally.
Yeah.
And they were arriving in considerable numbers, and they weren't welcomed.
No.
By 1905, Britain passes its first ever piece of immigration legislation in direct response to the outcry that is caused by the number of East European Jews arriving in the East End. It's the Aliens Act, as it's known.
Wow, didn't know that.
So, tough for David, tough for Marjorie. You're brought up as a Jewish girl, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm a Jewish girl from northwest London.
So the presumption was that Marjorie converted? What's the family story there?
I guess we just kind of assumed that she converted because the children were brought up as Jewish kids. And apparently she was quite strict to sort of keep to Jewish tradition.
You mentioned her being strict. Let's just check in with that family tree. Here we have your grandmother, Martha. Here she is with David.
Yeah.
And she's had numerous children. Starting from 1901, she gets cracking straight away. And she doesn't stop. I mean, by the time Joseph, your grandfather's born, she's in her 40s. You'd have to be strict. You mentioned that all the children grew up as Jews and went to the same Jewish school that you later went to. Well, we found several of the girls in a record of baptisms for the Church of England.
Oh, my God, really?
So all the girls seem to have been baptised in the Church of England.
But I wonder why she got the girls baptised and not the boys.
It might be they were considered a better prospect for marriage.
Right.
If they were baptised into the church.
Right.
They couldn't be of the Jewish faith, officially, because their mother was a Gentile.
Yeah.
But they could be baptised into the Church of England.
That is a shocker. That really is a shocker.
Remember, it was all about giving your children the best possible chance in life.
Of course.
And Martha knows what it's like to be on the outside, as does David, as an East European.
So that was really important to them.
Yeah. Wow. I wonder how that leaves you feeling, Sara, about great-grandmother Martha.
I feel sad for her, obviously, for what she went through. I'm glad she met David, and I'm glad that she had all those kids, and she also must have found some happiness.
And thank goodness it's resulted in you being here today to remind us of just how tough things could be.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And it's been a shock, but I'm really pleased we found out so much about her. Really appreciate it. It was unexpected, but really, really interesting. I feel really, really proud because she was obviously a real fighter and she made it through some really awful times. Finally, you know, we've solved the mystery of Marjorie, Martha, I'm not quite sure what to call her, but now I can talk a little bit to my son and obviously my dad and my aunties and uncles about, you know, where she came from, who she was and what she went through. So we know all those things now, so really excited to tell the family about it.
Lots of mysteries solved for Sara, who now knows her great-grandmother's real name, where she came from, and her eventual triumph over adversity. Coming up, Tessa has an emotional revelation for another guest.
The year before he married, they had a baby daughter.
British family numbers seem to be increasing, but we have a long way to go to match 18th century figures where the average number of children was 7. Patricia Hansford wants to find out about an ancestor who seemed to go completely against the norm and just had 1 child.
My name is Patricia Hansford and I originally come from Hull. It was my uncle in Canada. He got me interested in the family tree. He was doing his side. He used to ring my dad, ask him for information, and then me and my dad would trot down to the library, have a look on the microfilm to see what we could find. I found it quite exciting, and I think Dad did too. And it gave us that bond at that time in our lives. My main question would be to find out about William Waltham. What I know of William is he died in 1842. He was a drover, I presume with cattle or sheep. He had 1 son, Walter, and in that period, people didn't stick at 1 child. They all had big families. Did Walter have other siblings? But if he did, what happened to them? I've now hit a brick wall, and I personally can't get any further back with William. I want to do this for my dad. He was the Waltham line for me, and I want to extend it for him. He would have encouraged me to do that.
So, Pat, welcome.
Thank you.
So you're here today to find out about your great-great-great-great-granddad.
Yes.
Right? Now, that's the wonderful William Waltham.
It is.
And this man here is your dad.
It is.
And he got you started on this journey, didn't he?
He did, yes. Yeah.
The William Waltham that we're looking for, we've found a record for him. So this is a marriage record. This is for William Waltham and Jemima Forsdyke. These are your 4 times great-grandparents.
Yes.
And they're getting married in Cambridgeshire in 1824. He was 32 and she was 24. And you said they had a son called Walter.
Yes.
We've located a birth record for Walter Waltham in Spalding. Now, we believe the birth occurred on the 16th of April in 1839. Now, when we think about family history, and we think particularly around this time, we have a tendency to think of big families.
Yeah.
And there's a bunch of reasons why, you know, there wasn't viable contraception. More children often meant more help, particularly if you were an agricultural labourer, you had more children to help with the work that you were doing. So big families had an advantage to some extent. And you also had, you know, huge infant mortality rates.
Yeah.
And so your suspicion was, well, I found 1, there must be others. When we see this record actually dates to 39, but this is 15 years after they're married. You can have a lot of kids in 15 years.
Oh, yeah.
So we need to look to see if there's more children.
Yes.
We don't have civil registration yet. Civil registration happened in 1837, I think it came in.
Yeah.
Prior to that, you have the Parish Act, which required them to register all the baptisms. If you didn't have your children baptised, they don't exist in the records.
Yeah.
So there could be a whole bunch of reasons why you struggle to find any. But take some solace from the fact that we couldn't find any either.
Right.
You know, when we start to think about why couldn't we find any more children, we have to start positing a theory about why was that the case. We've found something that we think supports the economic theory,
Right.
if you like. So this is a newspaper article from 1840. William Waltham, drover, hath by indenture of assignment bearing the date the 30th of November last, assigned and transferred all his personal estate and effects unto Thomas Wadsley and Samuel Pockington. So what we think has happened here is this is a suggestion that perhaps he was having some financial difficulty and transferred his effects to them in order to cover some kind of debt. But what we do know, right, at this point in time, he was living apart from Jemima, and he was in financial difficulty. So she was probably doing what she needed to do in order to put food on the table for her and William, and he was doing what he needed to do in order to try and solve the financial difficulties he'd found himself in.
Right. I hadn't thought of them being separated or in that respect, anyway.
When we look on the 1851 census, 10 years later, we still see them living apart. And then we found this record, which is the death record for William Waltham. Jemima, his wife, was present at his death.
Yeah.
This single entry on this document, to me, says that there was something still there between the two of them. She was there when he needed her to be there.
Yeah. Nice to think they weren't separated and hated each other, basically. And it's nice to know that he didn't die alone.
But who was he? How was he seen by others? And one of the things we have to be really careful about when we're doing family history is to measure someone based on one record or two records, which is why we should look far and wide for information about who they were. And so I want to show you something that we found that I think gives us a wonderful insight into who your 4 times great-grandfather, William Waltham, was. It's an obituary.
Right.
His interment took place on Sunday last in the presence of one of the largest assemblages ever collected in Wilton. More than 500 persons passed over a bridge in procession at the entrance of the village, and upon reaching the church, the number was considerably increased.
Wow.
He was clearly a man of some standing in the community.
Yeah. I've never seen that before. To think that he was so well known and represented.
He was clearly well loved by the community.
Yeah.
Just by looking a little bit to the left and a little bit to the right of the sort of traditional approach, we found a lot more of the story of who this man was. And I hope we've given you a bit more insight into your family.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
And this is the man who inspired it all, isn't it? This is your dad.
That's my dad, yeah. I can't look at it. Yeah.
How do you think he'd feel to know all this stuff?
He would have been over the moon. He was really interested in it. As to the names, what happened in the family, it's hard even looking at that.
And it's your dad's story just as much as it's your story.
Yeah.
Pat, thank you for coming.
Thank you. That was very good, very interesting, finding out that when William died, that there was 500 people attended his funeral. Fascinating. I wouldn't have even thought there was 500 people that lived in the area. But to know that and have that knowledge shows he was well respected and gives you a bit more of an insight into the person that he was.
So Patricia leaves today having learnt a lot more about her 4 times great-grandfather, William Waltham.
Spain in the 1930s was so deeply divided between the right-wing nationalists and the left-wing Republicans that civil war broke out. Carmen Edwards from Wrexham wants to know if she has a connection to this historic event through her father, who she last saw 61 years ago.
I would like to know whether my father told any of the truth about his background. My name is Carmen Edwards. I live in Wrexham, but I was born in Reading in Berkshire. My parents split up before my first birthday, and I haven't seen my father since I was 4. When I was very young, you know, when things are going wrong in school and all the rest of it, the fantasy was that my father would come and, white knight, shining armour, take me away from all this. One of the few things I do have relating to my father is my birth certificate. And his name on that is Fernando Francis Athania. The story I was told was that my grandfather was Manuel Athania, who was president of Spain during the Civil War. I want to know if that's true. I was told that my father left Spain because of the Civil War, and he went to South Africa. I don't know how true it is. And eventually came to Britain. I want to know who my father was. Yes. Whoever he was my father. And I'd like the truth.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
What a fascinating story. Your father, Fernando Francisco Ferdi, I believe, Athania, claiming to be none other than the son of Manuel Athania, the former president of Spain. Wow. That's been quite a legacy for you to live with, or an idea of a legacy.
Yes.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the man on the screen, Manuel Athania. He was extraordinary from a wealthy, educated background, but a precocious politician from an early age. He's part of a group of liberals who oust Alfonso VIII, and Manuel becomes president in 1936. He wins the national elections and is really seen by many as this extraordinary politician, a man who is able to get some kind of semblance of order on the left from a hodgepodge of anarchists and socialists and communists and, of course, his Republicans. And it's called the Popular Front. What happens, of course, is there's a civil war. Huge number of lives are lost. By early 1939, Barcelona's fallen to the nationalists. At this stage, our man here, Manuel, has retreated into France. He says, I can't face any more loss of life, you know. And he dies in 1940 of a heart attack. So really a bitterly disappointing end for an extraordinary politician. Is your father one of his direct descendants? That is the question for today. Holding on to that thought, here we have a marriage certificate from Reading.
Yeah.
You said you were born in Reading, didn't you?
Yes.
Here he is, Francis Ferdinand Athania, married to your mother, Mary Elizabeth Roberts.
Yes.
So in this marriage certificate, in 1948, he is citing the former president of Spain as his father.
Oh.
Now, let's have a delve, if we may, into Manuel Athania's private life. Here he is with his wife.
Right.
The couple didn't have any children. And if your father's age is correct in that marriage certificate, and he was indeed born around 1913, it's not possible that she could have been his mother. She would have been too young.
Right.
In later documents, your father also claims that he was the nephew of Manuel Athania. So we thought we'll look into that as well. Manuel has two recognised brothers, of which only Gregorio had a son.
Right.
And that son was assassinated during the Spanish Civil War.
Ah.
So at the moment, the idea of your father being a direct descendant of the Athania political dynasty, if you like, is looking pretty tenuous. But let's keep going, because we want to find out who your father was. Get a bigger, better picture of this man. He then later claims that he became a lieutenant colonel in the South African Air Force.
Yes.
So we looked into records to see if we could track him in a military capacity in South Africa.
Yes.
We could neither place him in South Africa nor in the Air Force or in the military in general during that period. We have a documentation gap for your father.
Yes.
Okay, so let's focus on what we do know. We do know he was a language monitor for the BBC from 1948 to 1952. We do know that he married your mother in Reading in 1948.
Yes.
Your mother filed for divorce on grounds of desertion in the mid-1950s.
Yes.
What did you believe became of your father after he left your mother?
I have no idea.
This is your father's second marriage certificate in 1957. There were a couple of new facts, if we may label them as such at the moment. One is that he was an embassy secretary. So he's changed his job, but his father has changed somewhat. Still a Nathania, but this time a Fernando.
Yes.
There does seem to be an inconsistency in terms of the story your father's telling, even on documents.
Yes. I'm glad I'm hearing this now when I can take it. At 68, I can take it. At 28.
Here he is, in Brazil, in 1962, applying for a visa to Peru. I wonder if you're intrigued as to what he's doing.
Yeah, he's avocado. He's a lawyer.
He's claiming that his profession is that of a lawyer. This is the first time we'd come across this. That would have meant, probably, in all likelihood, he trained as a lawyer in Spain, so you'd expect him to have studied law in one of the Spanish universities. We could find no evidence of that. Whether that was one of your father's inventions, or whether, again, it was due to a lack of records.
Right.
There's something else vital that this document tells us. It's the first time we've seen a mother named.
Yes.
And what's your name?
Carmen.
It would appear that you may well have been named after your paternal grandmother. By now, he's working for the International Transport Workers Federation. He begins as a linguist, I believe, but becomes some sort of regional manager. Let's just go to a second visa application we have. This confirms that by now he's living in Lima, Peru.
Right.
And work records from this time testify to a man who was adventuresome, charismatic, effective.
Yes, charismatic, yes.
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 However, I'm afraid I do have something difficult to share with you in the context of his career in South America, which began well. He is accused of fraud. These are allegations that cause an almighty fall from grace. They don't press charges. He's not convicted of fraud. But when we next catch up with him, it proves fatal. We're back in London. It's 1965. We know that although he was an interpreter for much of his life, or in fact, at the time of his death, he was a night porter in the hotel in which he was found dead. You say you couldn't have managed this as a young woman. I wonder how 68-year-old Carmen's doing.
I knew there was something not right. But apparently he could charm the birds off the trees.
And indeed, that is in evidence in many of his work colleagues' comments. He had tremendous charisma.
Yeah.
So we're unable to pin your father genetically to Manuel Azaña. And your father, I think we can conclude, was a complex man. We're not quite finished.
Oh.
The year before he married his second wife, they had a baby daughter.
Ooh. I didn't expect that. Oh. I've got a sister.
You do.
A real one.
She was born in England, and if she's still alive, she'll be 62 years old.
Oh.
Have you always been an only child?
Yes.
Well, that is something you could potentially look into.
Yes. Oh,
You've done really well, Carmen. Quite a lot to discover.
thank you.
It's a table across from a stranger.
Whoa. That's the biggest shock. And the best one, too. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing this amazing story with us. Certainly a colourful character.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. All's forgiven, isn't it? He was my dad. That's all there is to it, really. I was an only child. I've been an only child for 68 years. And now you turn around and tell me I'm not. I've got a sister who's 6 years younger than me. Incredible. Absolutely incredible.
Carmen may not be related to the former president of Spain, but she has discovered a half-sister she never knew about. Well, it's been an exciting day here in Cheshire, solving mysteries and finding lost family. For now, though, it's goodbye. Do join us next time when we'll be helping more people find their place in history.